The worst kept secret of 2024 is finally out of the bag. Adrian Newey is headed to Aston Martin. And while it seemed like the stars were aligning for a storybook move to Ferrari, the more you think about it, a move to Aston Martin actually makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about it. Firstly, Adrian Newey has ties to Aston Martin. A lot of people forget that Aston Martin sponsored Red Bull a lot during the turbo hybrid era, even serving as title sponsor from 2018 to 2020. And while they weren't super involved with the actual Formula One operations themselves, I'm sure the higher ups at Red Bull, including Adrian Newey, formed a lot of relationships within Aston Martin. Likewise, Adrian did a lot of work on the Aston Martin Valkyrie, and while that was about half a decade ago now, I'm sure there's still a lot of relationships that he's formed on the road card side of Aston Martin that he still has today. And don't forget, Aston Martin is a pretty big racing brand in its own right. It can be easy to say, how could Adrian turn down working for Ferrari, the biggest racing brand in history? But Aston Martin is one of the biggest racing brands in the United Kingdom. There's a reason why all of us were upset when AMR Green was replaced by ugly BWT Pink on that Aston Martin in 2021, because that Aston Martin Green is so recognizable as a historic racing brand in the United Kingdom. Secondly, Adrian Newey's getting pretty old. He's a 65-year-old man. Maybe he just didn't feel like moving himself and all of his belongings to Italy to work for Ferrari as he begins to wrap up his career. He's been in motorsports in the United Kingdom for over 40 years, and I'm sure that comes with a lot of friendships and relationships along the way. If you look back at his career, he's worked for Williams, McLaren, Red Bull. Maybe Aston Martin was just the next logical move across the UK for his career. Thirdly, he's always said he wanted to work with Lewis Hamilton or Fernando Alonso. And sure, Fernando Alonso's name has really only entered this conversation after it was announced that Adrian would be moving to Aston Martin. But if a move to Ferrari with Lewis Hamilton just wasn't working out for Adrian, perhaps a move to Aston with Fernando was the next best option. There was no way he could work with them both, and while it probably wasn't a deciding factor all on its own, working with Fernando just might have been the icing on the cake when you include all these previous factors we've talked about. And last, but certainly not least, Aston Martin is paying Adrian Newey a lot of money. He's supposedly making around £30 million a year, but with bonuses and incentives, it might as well just be a blank check. I'm sure Adrian Newey could walk into Lawrence Stroll's office and say, my beachfront condo isn't that great, I need a new one, and Lawrence Stroll would make it happen. So, with all that out of the way, it makes a lot of sense to ask the question, when will Aston Martin actually be competitive again? Well, it's hard to say, but if there's anyone you wanted on your team for a regulation change, it's Adrian Newey. We all remember Braun GP winning the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship in 2009, but I think a lot of people forget just how close Red Bull came to snatching those championships at the end of the year. It's clear Adrian got those regulations right, as Red Bull went on to dominate the rest of that regulation. In 2014, Mercedes became the dominant team, but it's pretty clear to anyone who watched Formula One that Adrian held up his end of the deal for Red Bull, and Renault kind of let him down. Even though they lacked power and reliability, they always had the best chassis and performed well at street circuits like Monaco and Singapore, just ask 2018 Daniel Ricciardo. When the regulations changed again for 2022 and the sport moved more towards aerodynamics and a little bit away from an engine formula, Red Bull once again shot to the front of the field and had one of the most dominant seasons in the history of the sport in 2023. There's really no way for us to expect Aston Martin to be competitive in 2025. Adrian Newey's not starting work with the team until March, and by that point, the car will already be fully developed and the Formula One season will already be underway. And you could argue that there might be some mid to late season upgrades that Adrian could have an influence on, but 2026 will really be the first true Adrian Newey designed Aston Martin. There are some concerns about 2026 being a big engine formula again and thus giving Mercedes the advantage, but the Honda engine that Aston Martin is switching to isn't that bad of an engine in its own right. Plus, Adrian has a lot of experience working with Honda engines from his time at Red Bull. I wouldn't expect Aston Martin to come out of the gate swinging in 2026 and be immediate championship contenders, but I think that team would take a 2018 or 2019 level of Red Bull success. I mean, after all, they were Force India just a couple of years ago, this small team from Silverstone who we couldn't believe they were getting the results that they were getting. And while Lawrence Stroll has put a lot of resources into that team, a transformation just doesn't happen overnight. I think 2027 or 2028 is a more realistic time to expect Aston Martin to be at the front consistently and be competing for podiums, wins, and championships. Will Fernando Alonso even still be in the car? Are we about to see Lance Stroll World Championship, or could a driver like Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc even take a risk on an up-and-coming team like Aston Martin? All of that is yet to be seen, but for now, I'm just excited to see what Adrian Newey cooks in that Aston Martin. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you left a comment, hit that like button, and even subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow. My name is Justin. This is the Podium Pushers YouTube channel, and we will see you in the next one.